Hello, everyone, and we are back again on OncoDaily TV with the Leaders in Oncology series, and I'm Shoshana Hosepian, your host today, and I am very happy to introduce our special guest today, Rob Iannone, who is the Executive Vice President of Research and Development and CMO of Jazz Pharmaceuticals. It is a truly pleasure to have you here today with us, Rob. Thank you very much for joining.
Thank you for having me. It's my pleasure.
Thank you. So to kick things off, let's start from the very beginning. What first inspired you to pursue a career in oncology, and how did that early experience shape your purpose as a leader today?
Sure. Well, I might take even one step further back and talk about what inspired me to go to medical school from the beginning. When I was a college student, I had the opportunity to do a student internship at the National Institutes of Health, specifically NINDS, which is the Neurology Institute, and had the privilege of working for Clarence Gibbs, who was the lab director, part of a bigger lab, Carlton Gadishak's. It was a Nobel Prize-winning lab. And I worked there with many senior scientists, but maybe even more importantly, students of all ages. So there were students who were younger than I from high school. There were students who were older than I in medical school or postgraduate programs. And that exciting environment of doing science that was directly related to medicine and interacting with people who were at different stages of their medical journey really convinced me that I wanted to go to medical school as well. And so that's where it started. I had lots of ideas of what might be a good specialty for me. And I to be honest, was probably focused quite a bit at that time on cardiology. This was 1989, and there was a lot of exciting advances in preventive cardiology. Unfortunately, my father was diagnosed with kidney cancer when I was a second-year medical student. It would have been 1991. And at that time, there were no approved treatments for kidney cancer. So there was really nothing that he could be offered outside of a clinical trial. He actually did enroll in the clinical trial and unfortunately didn't have personal benefit from it. But it was that experience that, was my calling to oncology.
Thank you for sharing that. And personal experience always is the strongest one that drives motivation, actually, fortunately or unfortunately. And moving into the leadership, how do you personally define leadership, especially in the context of transforming patient outcomes on a global scale?
For leaders that I really admire and I tried to emulate, there are many aspects, attributes. But important amongst them, I would say, is leaders who are truly visionaries, who can see what might be possible. And that early experience for me at NIH was really about that. It was not just about learning how to be a doctor and how to provide state-of-the-art care, but finding areas where there was still unmet need and envisioning what could be done about it, imagining what could be possible for patients who, couldn't benefit from available therapies, or for whom available therapies were just not good enough, like my father. I would say part of that leadership is also inspiring followership. So I know coming up, there are many people that I saw, they're doing something that I want to be part of. And thinking about, as a leader myself, how can I also inspire that kind of followership? And then, lastly for me, persistence and dedication. I can think of many examples in my own career, but just in seeing how medicine has evolved where things don't work out right away. And it'd be very easy to give up. If you think about the field of immunotherapy, for example. I was on faculty at University of Pennsylvania before joining industry. And so I got to know Carl June and many in the area who were developing immunotherapies for cancer. And there were lots of things that didn't work right away. And ultimately, though, that led to CAR T therapy, the first CAR T therapy. That was, transformational. So persistence and dedication through what's often very challenging science and reality.
And on that note, leadership is also about learning from others. Who have been the most influential mentors in your journey, and what is the most important leadership lesson you have learned from that now you apply in your daily work?
Well, again, I would go back to those earliest days for me when I was still exploring whether I wanted to be a physician, and the experience in Dr. Clarence Gibbs's lab at the National Institutes of Health, NINDS. And there I really learned that science is what drives medicine and medical innovation. And so I went to medical school with the idea that I wanted to be a physician scientist. That didn't come to me later. And that's always been a guiding principle to me. I love patient care, but the driver for me was around doing science that could ultimately impact new treatments. So I think that Dr. Gibbs was certainly my earliest mentor. And I would say, science driving medicine is the lesson there. If I think a little further along in my career, as a fellow in pediatric oncology, I worked in the laboratory of Ephraim Fuchs, who was a physician and immunologist, doing bone marrow transplantation and immune therapies, a true innovator in that space, then and still is. And what I took from him is really the objective pursuit of truth. He had a very, let's say, systematic and objective way of, pursuing his interests and really understanding what was true and not necessarily deviating from that, pivoting from what he learns. The last person I would mention is Briggs Morrison, who was my boss and manager at AstraZeneca when I was leading late stage immuno-oncology development. And from Briggs, what I learned was, how to empower other leaders, especially in that setting where, drug development involves so many different people with different skill sets, all pulling in the same direction. So how to empower other leaders as a way to really amplify the impact that you could have as a leader. You can't do it all yourself. You can't be the one that comes up with all the ideas. And so empowering leaders to be innovative, as a way to amplify your impact.
Guys, that's very inspiring. I always like the stories of mentors. And in your current role, how do you approach balancing scientific innovation with strategic decision-making, especially when timelines and patients' needs are so urgent?
It's easy to fall into the trap of being so excited about what you're doing, to want to do everything. And I think even I've worked at big companies, I've worked at small companies, I've been at several academic institutions. There are always constraints around what you actually can do. So for me, a key lesson in response to your question is to really prioritize the most important things and drive success, because the early success creates new opportunities. So work on the most important things, make sure it's clear to your team what's the priority, make sure that you follow through. A good idea is only that. It has to be followed through on to completion. And so driving success then enables opportunities for future innovation. I can think of a current example at Jazz. We're developing what I think is a very exciting drug called zanidatamab. It's a biparatopic antibody, so a very differentiated approach to treating patients with HER2 amplified cancers. Our strategy there has been to focus in areas of the highest unmet need. First going into biliary tract cancer, for which it's approved, and then expanding into the front line for gastric and esophageal cancer, adenocarcinoma in particular, and then using those successes potentially to expand, into breast cancer and possibly beyond. So I would say prioritizing and driving early success.
Yeah, so you briefly touched upon the differentiations, but what other things differentiate a company's approach to innovation and patient impact from other organizations in the field?
Yeah. So Jazz is not a huge company. I've worked at Merck. At one point we were over 100,000 people. Jazz is probably about 3,000 in total. So we're not a huge company, but we have everything we need to succeed. If we can be really clear on where we want to focus, and I think we have been. We have focused on where we think we can have the most impact in areas where there's just the highest unmet medical need, and striving to make a big difference in those places. I could give you a couple of examples. One where I think innovation in the science was really important, and that's for Modeso, a drug that we recently got approval for treatment of high-grade gliomas, very poor prognosis disease. The innovation there was around the discovery of a mutation called the H3K27M mutation, that when it was studied at Chimerix, where we licensed the drug from, when it was studied there, it was found patients who are carrying this mutation had much better responses. And ultimately, it was then researched and understood why that would be the case. The mechanism of Modeso to remethylate genes that had been turned on that were driving unwanted growth and cancer in cells. And so that innovation and targeting that innovation was an example of going after something where there was a high unmet need where we thought we could uniquely have an impact. I would say another is around innovating, not just around the science, but in everything we do for drug development. And so an example I would use at Jazz would be Zepzelca in the Inforte trial, where we had approval in patients who had progressed after their initial therapy for small cell lung cancer. But we thought we could benefit many more patients by going into frontline treatment. And we were creative about how we did that. Sometimes it's hard to combine many different drugs all at once. So we did something called a switch maintenance design, where after patients had their initial therapy, rather than coming off of therapy entirely, they were switched over to Zepzelca. And that proved to be a much better approach than waiting for those patients' tumors to progress. So innovation not only in the science, but innovation in how you approach drug development, with the idea that we want to focus on areas where we can have the biggest impact and where there's the highest unmet need.
Thank you for sharing that. And where there is a success, there are also a lot of challenges. And what are the biggest challenges that facing oncology drug development today, from your perspective?
Well, this is my 20th year in industry, and I graduated medical school in 1994, so many years doing research. And if I ever thought it was easy, which I really didn't, I've only learned over the years how hard it is to do good science and to translate that science into new treatments for patients. I've been fortunate to be part of many development programs where we've been successful at doing that. But as you say, there are many challenges. The way I like to think about it in terms of setting the research agenda at Jazz is to find the right targets, number one. As an example, for zanidatamab, we know that HER2 amplification, overexpression, mutation that causes activation is a key driver for many different tumor types. And if you can target that pathway, either turn it off so that it's not driving cancerous growth, or to mark cells for immune destruction, that can be an effective therapy. So going after the right targets, but also using the right modality and technology. So there have been many drugs developed against HER2 therapy, some better than others. Zanidatamab, we think, is the right modality in that it's a unique mechanism of action. It's a antibody structure called biparatopic antibody binding. Each antibody binds to two different places on the receptor, and that's much more effective than antibodies that bind in a single location or multiple antibodies that bind across different targets. And so finding the right target and taking the right approach, as we as we think we're doing with zanidatamab, I think are ways that we get around some of the biggest challenges in drug development. Maybe to throw a third one in, certainly since I started doing clinical research, maybe my first clinical trial was in year 2000, 25 years ago. The cost has become extremely high. And the risk is that the cost will stifle innovation. And so, we're very focused on how can technology and innovation, how can different ways of doing things really allow us to do more for patients through our clinical trial work. And, we're seeing some of the benefits of, what people refer to as artificial intelligence or novel technologies that help us do certain things more quickly at a lower cost, but most importantly, at a higher quality to benefit patients. I'm excited to see where that goes because I think we're just at the beginning of that.
Yeah, for sure. And now about the culture of the company. How do you create an environment which empowers team to think boldly, take smart risks, and innovate with purpose?
Yeah, I mean, Jazz actually is a pretty unique company because it was founded about 25 years ago. The founding CEO only recently retired. Bruce Kozad is continuing on as chairman of the board. We now have our second CEO. So a pretty unique place where there was an opportunity to really focus on things like culture and be sure that was underlying everything we do for patients. We've articulated that as a set of guiding values: integrity, collaboration, innovation, passion, and pursuit of excellence. And so I would say, how do we live that at Jazz? Well, for me as a leader, model those behaviors, encourage people, reward those behaviors. As an example, encourage people to innovate, and you use the word risk. You would take measured risks, of course, but doing things differently that could ultimately be a big reward for patients and for the company, rather than doing things the same way we always did. So innovation is a really big part of that. I would also highlight collaboration. There's nothing that we can do on our own, especially in clinical research. I would highlight that we collaborate every day with every clinical trial, with clinicians and scientists at academic centers, with other partners in the industry. But I would say other groups, such as maybe you're familiar with iSpy. It's a really innovative, cooperative group studying new ways to treat early breast cancer, led by Dr. Laura Esserman. It's an example of a collaboration that we value and we think, we benefit from, and as does the cooperative group, as does ultimately patients.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. And it's very inspiring. But outside of your demanding professional life, we all know how important it is also to stay grounded and energized. What personal hobbies or practices help you to just do that?
Sure. Well, I come from a very big family. I'm the youngest of 8. So now that's a big extended family. So I certainly enjoy spending time with family. My wife is 31 years, as well as my 3 kids. Just doing the usual stuff. Having a meal with family, playing pickleball, basketball, or whatnot. Fishing. We love to hang out at the Jersey Shore. I grew up at the Jersey Shore. And then, having a great friend network has been really important to me. I've been lucky to, now we're in our current community for almost 25 years, close friend network that gets together for basketball or cycling or, other social events. And, I look forward to and cherish the time I have with friends and family.
Nice. And what 3 books you can mention that have shaped your thinking the most during your years in oncology field?
Yeah.
And also beyond.
Yeah. Well, gosh, so many, but I would have to say maybe that in the earliest times, Janeway's immunology textbook. Charlie Kingway was my immunology professor at Yale Medical School. He was writing the textbook as he was teaching it to us. And that's the first time I really got interested in immunology as a field. So I have to certainly mention that. Being in the industry where we are, where constant change and innovation is critical to success and survival. I love the book by Reed Hastings, No Rules Rules, and his experience at Netflix. How Netflix became Netflix and Blockbuster became not Blockbuster anymore, and the lessons learned from that. Another that I would mention, I did all my training in pediatrics and pediatric hematology oncology at Johns Hopkins in Baltimore. And those were really formative years. I would say The Immortal Life of Henrietta Lacks has a book that I think makes the point how important it is to respect patients and to approach research in patients with the utmost of care and recognition for what they are sacrificing for the greater good.
Nice. Thank you for sharing that. And what would be your advice to young oncologists?
There's still a lot to be done. So stay with it. As you talked about, it's not always easy. Usually it's not. But there's still a great need for good oncologists, but also oncology research to drive innovation in this space. But my daughter is a third-year medical student now, and I think it would be great if she went into oncology.
Nice. Yeah. That's it's not so usual that parents drive their children to medicine, but I also come from a family that are a lot of doctors. So yeah, thank you so much, Robert, for sharing all that insights. It was very enriching experience, and we were very happy to have you on our OncoDaily TV. Thank you very much, and to our listeners, until next time. Thank you.
Thank you. Take care.
Don't forget to like, comment, share, and subscribe to OncoDaily on YouTube. Hit the bell icon to stay updated.